Archmagos Cogitor Yul'kaeth of the Mars Sol Forge Council opens a sealed Imperial Armor monograph in 487 M37. The monograph is titled Throne Architectures, a Comparative Analysis, restricted to Adeptus Mechanicus archmagi at the Cogitor-grade or higher. He reads the third paragraph. The third paragraph reads, "The throne's central anchor-spar conforms in 11 structural particulars to artifacts recovered from the Halo Stars Krork-staging sites, dated to no later than the war in heaven." Yul'kaeth closes the monograph. He never opens it again. He never speaks of it again. He lives another 300 years and dies in 808.M37 with the knowledge unshared. The monograph is sealed. The 11 particulars are real. A note before we begin. Yul'kaeth is illustrative. His monograph is illustrative. The 11 particulars are illustrative. No published Imperial Armor text contains this passage, and no canonical Archmagos by that name has been documented. What is real is the question the illustration dramatizes. What is real is the canonical evidence that supports the question. The thesis advanced in this video is audience strong and canon-hint-only. The flag stays at the top. The flag stays in the body. The flag stays at the end. Where the canon refuses to resolve a thing, the video refuses to resolve it too. That is the discipline of the Imperial Iterator's Register. We are going to spend the next half hour walking the architectural evidence path. We are going to look at what the Krork were, what their engineering was, where the old ones lost their last war, where the Emperor was during the long pre-unification millennia he has never been required to account for, and what the throne does that no human civilization has ever known how to build. And at the end of it, we are going to ask a question. We are not going to answer the question. The question is the only honest deliverable. Begin with the Krork. The Krork were not orcs. The Krork came first. According to the Warhammer 40,000 Wiki and Lexicanum's Krork entry, both drawing on Codex Orcs 9th edition and the Wargamer.com canonical summary, the Krork were a war-bred warrior species engineered by the Old Ones during the War in Heaven, more than 60 million Terran years before the first recognizable human stood upright on Holy Terra. The Old Ones are the species we now know best by the name the Eldari gave them. The Orcs gave them a different name. The Orcs called them the Brain Boys. They were reptilian. They built the webway. They engineered most of the intelligent species currently alive in the galaxy. And when the Catan came and turned the Necron tier into the Necrons and began the war we now call the War in Heaven, the Old Ones engineered a soldier race to fight that war for them. The soldier race was the Krork. Look at the engineering profile. The Krork stood, in some cases, 12 meters tall. The canonical phrasing in Codex Orcs is that they wore an exoskeleton far in advance of anything the Orcs might now conceive of. Read that sentence as a mechanicus would read it. The Krork's personal armament was a higher technology than the current Imperium's. The current Imperium, at its peak heresy-era output, was building suits like Terminator plate and Tartaros plate, and the canonical Codex statement says the Krork's personal armament exceeded this. And consider what they were engineered to fight. They were engineered to fight Necrons. They were also engineered, per the Wargamer.com canonical summary, to fight demons and enslavers. They were warp-active warriors. The Brain Boys, according to the Brain Boys Lexicanum entry, encoded technical and engineering knowledge directly into the genetic structure of the Krork at a cellular level. The modern Orc's technogene is the diminished surviving fragment of that programming, An orc mech boy is born understanding gear ratios because his Krork ancestor was born understanding warp anchor architectures. So consider the inheritance. The orcs you see today are the diminished descendants of the Krork. They have a fraction of the genetic instruction set. They have a fraction of the size. They have a fraction of the technology. And even diminished, an orc mech boy can keep a battle wagon running on parts that an Adeptus Mechanicus tech priest would condemn as ritually impure on contact. Now scale that intuition backwards. Multiply by 60 million years of evolutionary loss. Multiply by 12 meters of height. Multiply by an exoskeleton beyond Terminator plate. What you arrive at is not a horde of greenskins. What you arrive at is a Krork war engineer who could design a chamber that holds open a gate into the immaterium and survives the act of doing so. And consider the canonical phrasing more carefully. The Codex, Orc's 9th edition treatment, released by Games Workshop in 2021, is precise on a point that often gets overlooked. The Imperium does not know how large the orcs can become. The Imperium does not know how technologically advanced their civilization can become. The canon explicitly states that the more orcs fight, the larger they become, and the more stable their civilization, the more advanced they grow. The current orcs have not been allowed to stabilize since the war in heaven. The current orcs are what greenskins look like when they are denied the conditions to return to their ancestral form. The Krork were not the orcs at their best. The Krork were the orcs at their original baseline. The orcs at their best may be a thing the Imperium has never seen. The Krork at their best, 60 million years ago, were the thing the old ones used to hold a galaxy together. What nobody mentions is this. The Krork were the only race the old ones built specifically for warp-anchored, psychically active, scale warfare deployment. The Eldari were psychic, but the Eldari were not engineered for siege. The Slann were psychic, but the Slann were not engineered for the front line. The Jokairo were engineers, but the Jokairo were not psychic. The Krork were the only Old One's creation that combined all three traits: warp-active, psychic, engineered. The Krork were the Old One's answer to the problem of building something that could hold a position against the Catan and the Necrons and the Warp at the same time. And consider what that means for the question of what kind of architecture they would have built. They would have built architectures that did exactly that. Move now to the war they were built to fight, the war in heaven. According to Codex Necron's 9th edition, summarized by Goonhammer's review, the war in heaven was the galaxy-spanning conflict between the Old Ones and the Catan, with the Necron tier turned Necrons as the Catan soldiers. The Necron tier had originally lost a separate war against the Old Ones, and in their darkest hour, under the Silent King Sarek, they accepted the Catan's offer of biotransference. They surrendered their souls for immortality. They woke up as Necrons. And then, the Catan led them back into the field against the Old Ones again, with the cold mechanical bodies the Catan had designed for them. The Old Ones brought the Krork. The Old Ones brought the Eldari. The Old Ones brought the Slann. The Old Ones brought every young race they had ever made. And the Old Ones, per the canon, were winning the war as the war became something else. The Old Ones won the conflict against the Necrons in a tactical sense, but lost the war in a strategic one. The aftershocks of what the psychically active young races did to the warp during that conflict destroyed the Old Ones' civilization. The Catan were eventually shattered. The Necrons went into stasis on tomb worlds across the galaxy. The Eldari inherited the webway. The Krork persisted, but their numbers collapsed. Their engineering knowledge degraded across the generations, and they devolved by stages into the orcs we know now. The strategic geography of that defeat matters. The Old Ones did not lose in a single battle. They lost across millennia, retreating from stronghold to stronghold, leaving behind the infrastructure they could no longer hold. The webway closures, the shattered sub-realms, the sealed gates that the Eldari would later inherit and never fully reopen. Every retreat left behind a layer of engineering that no successor civilization understood how to maintain.
The Eldari, the species the Old Ones built to inherit the webway,
are explicitly described in canon as unable to rebuild the grand tunnels. They can only close the warp gates that are decaying or infiltrated. They cannot build new ones. They cannot fix the old ones. The Old Ones' engineering exceeded what their own children could maintain. The battle sites where the Krork held the line against the Necrons were left behind. According to the Halo Stars Lexicanum entry, the Halo Stars are the oldest stars in the galaxy, ringing the outer Milky Way at approximately 200,000 light-years. The Necron-tier's pre-biotransference homeworld was located there, and the Halo Stars, by the standard reading, are the kind of place where the deepest time battle sites of the war in heaven would have ended up.
The Halo Zone, the Ghoul Stars,
the eastern fringe approaches to the galactic rim. All of these regions sit on the periphery of recorded space. All of them sit close to where the Necron-tier originated, and all of them are exactly the kind of regions where Krork war engineering would have been deployed at scale to hold the Catan back. The official record states that no specific Krork-staging site in the Halo Stars has ever been catalogued by an Imperial expedition. That is true. That is also exactly what you would expect of a region the modern Imperium cannot safely enter. The Halo Stars sit beyond the Astronomicon. The Astronomicon's light does not reliably reach into the halo. Warp navigation in the halo is functionally impossible for Imperial vessels. The few astropaths who claim to have received signals from the halo describe geometry that should not exist. If a Krork war engine survived 60 million years anywhere, the halo is precisely where it would have survived.
And if a being capable of reaching the halo had been moving through the galaxy in the long millennia before Terran unification,
the halo is precisely where he would have looked. Which brings us to the Emperor's pre-unification movements. Here, the discipline of the niche register matters most. The canonical position, per the Warhammer 40,000 wiki and the Warhammer Guild Emperor of Mankind lore guide, is that the Emperor's existence predates the unification of Terra by tens of thousands of years. The dominant origin narrative places him as the collective reincarnation of Earth's Neolithic shamans, born in a single body in Anatolia near the Sakarya River, somewhere around the 8th millennium before the Common Era. Between that birth and the unification wars of the late 29th millennium, the Emperor lived on Terra under many names. Some of those names are catalogued, most are not. Some of those millennia are catalogued, most are not. Consider this.
A being capable of reaching escape velocity from Terra existed continuously for more than 50,000 years before the Imperium began. We are not told what he did during those 50,000 years. The canon does not exclude off-world travel. The canon does not exclude long absences. The canon does not exclude prolonged residence in regions the Imperium would later be unable to reach. The Emperor's pre-unification armament includes, by canonical description, elements no extant civilization could have manufactured. The canon does not tell us where he obtained them. The canon, very deliberately, leaves the door open. The script is not going to walk through that door uninvited. The script is going to stand in the doorway and observe what is on the other side. What is on the other side is the throne. According to the Golden Throne Lexicanum entry, The core device that would become the Golden Throne was discovered by the Emperor sometime in the 30th millennium during the Unification Wars, buried in sunken ruins under a desert on the continent of Asia. The exact origin of the core device, per the canonical text, is currently unknown. The text dates it, conservatively, to the Dark Age of technology. The text does not date it earlier than that. The text also does not date it later. It says unknown. Read that word as a mechanicus would read it. Unknown is not a synonym for human. Unknown is not a synonym for Dark Age. Unknown means the Imperium does not know. Few people register the specific framing. The canonical lexicanum text on the throne notes that even the Emperor himself was unsure whether the idea was his, or to what extent the devices he discovered had served as inspiration.
The Emperor, a being whose psychic capacity exceeds every other recorded mind in the galaxy, could not, by his own canonical admission, fully separate his contribution from the inheritance. That is a startling phrase if you spend a moment with it. The most powerful psyker in the galaxy looked at the device he had found, and at the modifications he had made, and could not draw a clean line between them. He recognized what he was building on. He could not measure how much of the original he had preserved. The being who knows everything was unsure. After Ulanor, the Emperor returned to Terra and spent over 2 centuries personally working on modifications to that core device. He turned it into a fixed entry point into the Eldari webway. The throne, in its finished form, is described in the fandom wiki as utilizing ancient, advanced biomechanical technology dating to the Dark Age of technology. The post-heresy life support functions, the cybernetic apparatus that now keeps the Emperor's body functioning, those were modifications added by the Mechanicum after the Siege of Terra. They are bolted on. They are not the original device. The original device was something the Emperor found, and consider what kind of architecture the original device must have had to do what it does. It is a permanent, stable anchor between real space and the immaterium. It amplifies psychic power to galactic scale. It interfaces with the Eldari webway, a structure built by the Old Ones. It is psychically active, warp-anchored, and scale-optimized to hold the position of a single immortal psyker against the constant intrusion pressure of every warp entity in the local neighborhood. The Adeptus Mechanicus, despite 10,000 years of trying, cannot repair its primary mechanisms. Per the Adeptus Mechanicus lexicanum entry, the throne is canonically beyond their ability to maintain.
The Fabricator General of Mars investigated the core mechanisms personally, according to the Trazen Throne Lane anchor material, and died during the attempt. Imagine the criteria a piece of engineering would have to satisfy to be that thing. Psychic anchor structures, warp-baked alloys that retain their integrity under sustained immaterium pressure, scale-dependent power coupling that draws on the volume of the surrounding warp rather than on a finite power source, a geometry that resolves the topology problem of holding a stable gate, and consider which of the species the Old Ones built was engineered to deliver exactly that combination of traits. Warp-active, psychic, engineered for scale warfare, built to hold a position against Catan and warp entities at the same time. There is only one Old One's creation that matches the spec, the Krork. The architectural fingerprint of a warp-anchored Krork war engine, scaled down from a battlefield deployment to a single throne installation, would look very much like the device the Emperor found buried under an Asian desert. The 11 structural particulars in the illustrative monograph are not in any published text. The categorical claim the illustration dramatizes is, however, supportable. If you list the canonical specifications of the throne against the canonical engineering profile of the Krork, the match is closer than the match against any documented human or Eldari architecture.
Human Dark Age technology produced warp drive, but never produced a warp-anchored fixed gate. Eldari technology produced webway conduits, but never produced a single-point amplifier capable of driving the Astronomicon. The Krork engineering profile, as canonically documented, is the only one of the three that produces what the throne does. Walk the criteria one more time.
The throne anchors itself in the warp without consuming itself. Krork engineering, per the canonical descriptions of their exoskeletons and battlefield deployment, was warp-stable at sustained operational tempo. The throne amplifies psychic output across galactic distances. Krork engineering was scale warfare optimized, designed not for a single warrior, but for armies fighting Cogitor-grade threats. The throne interfaces with the Eldari webway as a fixed entry point. Krork engineering was contemporary with the Old One's webway construction, and was the soldier race specifically defending the webway architectures against Necron incursion. Across every dimension that matters, warp stability, scale, webway adjacency, psychic amplification, the Krork profile maps onto the throne profile. The same cannot be said for any documented human technology, including the Dark Age. The same cannot be said for any documented Eldari technology, including the pre-fall Eldari.
The fit is closer with Krork than with the alternatives.
The audience extrapolated reading is, by the architectural evidence, the strongest reading. Canon refuses to confirm it. Canon also refuses to refute it. The shape of Canon's refusal is itself the most interesting evidence on the question. Consider this. The Drukhari can interface with it. This is canonical. According to The Dark City, the Vaults of Terra novel by Chris Raitt, the Fabricator General Ud Udia Raskian traveled in person to Camorra to deal directly with Archon Shay Morvain of the Cabal of the Still-Living Knife, seeking expertise in repairing the throne. The Drukhari delegation, according to the Lexicanum entry on Raskian, delayed the death of the Golden Throne by what Erasmus Kroll described as a few centuries.
The Drukhari, who are the Eldari faction least connected to webway maintenance, who have spent the time since the fall harvesting souls in a city built inside the webway, have engineering knowledge that the unified Adeptus Mechanicus does not possess. How? The canonical answer is that the Drukhari retain pre-fall Eldari engineering vocabulary, and the throne's architecture is sufficiently webway adjacent that the vocabulary is applicable. That is the dominant reading. It is also a complete reading. The thesis this video advances is a different reading. The thesis is that the Drukhari can interface with the throne because the throne's underlying architecture is Old One's engineering, specifically the Krork subvariant of Old One's engineering, and the pre-fall Eldari had a working architectural vocabulary for Old One's engineering because the Eldari themselves were built by the Old Ones. The Drukhari's interface capability is downstream of a shared lineage with the original engineers. They recognize the work because both they and the work come from the same hands. Frame this as one possible mechanism among several. It is not the only mechanism. It is a mechanism that explains the canonical fact of the Drukhari throne interface using the canonical fact of the shared Old One's origin. It is a mechanism that does not require any new canon. It rearranges canon that already exists into a single causal chain. But the question remains. The brief Andy Chambers writes for Drukhari in Path of the Dark Eldar carries the architectural register the Eldari inherited. The Drukhari maintain a working knowledge of how their forebears built things. If the throne is built in that same idiom, then the Drukhari delegation that walks into the chamber beneath the Imperial Palace recognizes what they are looking at before they begin work. They do not learn the throne, they identify it.
The way a working watchmaker identifies a Vacheron movement when she opens the case.
She does not study it. She recognizes it. Now consider Trazyn. Trazyn the Infinite, Necron overlord of the Nihilak dynasty, Archaeovist of Solemnus. Before biotransference, per the canonical sources catalogued in the Trazyn Lexicanum entry and the Warhammer Guild lore guide on him, Trazyn was a Necron-tier chief archivist who oversaw the mummification of the Necron-tier pharaons. He was a man of the records. He was a man of the catalog. He was a man whose entire professional formation was about identifying which artifacts of a civilization mattered enough to preserve. And he is unusual among Necron overlords in that he retains a significant portion of his pre-biotransference personality, owing to self-installed protection protocols. The man who walks through Solemnus today is, to a meaningful extent, the same archivist who walked through the funerary chambers of the Necron tier before the Catan made the offer. Solemnus's collection, per the canonical descriptions in Codex Necrons across multiple editions, contains specimens from species that no longer exist anywhere else in the galaxy. The Wraithbone Choir of Altensar, the preserved head of Sebastian Thor, the ossified husk of an enslaver, a clone of Fulgrim. The collection's contents are the only surviving record of entire civilizations, and that fact is the structural truth that gives Trazyn his strategic position in the modern setting. He is the species' memory. He is the galaxy's last comprehensive archive of what was lost in the War in Heaven. And among the artifacts catalogued on Solemnus, there are reliably Old Ones era objects. The empathic obliterator he carries is one of them. The staff is canonically rumored to contain Old One's technology. If Trazyn already carries Old One's technology as his personal sidearm, he already operates on terms of professional familiarity with the engineering vocabulary of the throne's possible builders. That archivist lived through the War in Heaven, or at minimum, he lived through its closing phases as a Necron lord. He fought against the Old One's soldier races. He fought against the Krork. The canon does not give us a date for the Necron-Krork field engagement specifically, but the canon establishes that the Krork were among the Old One's principal soldiery in the conflict, and the canon establishes that Trazyn was operating as an archivist throughout. He saw Krork engineering on the battlefield. He saw Krork war engines deployed. He saw the architecture by which the Old Ones held positions against his own kind, and he remembers. His empathic obliterator, the staff he carries everywhere, is canonically rumored to contain technology derived from the long-extinct Old Ones. His galleries at Solemnus, per the Codex, Necron's 9th edition treatment, contain artifacts from species the rest of the galaxy has forgotten existed. The Trazyn Throne Lane Anchor video establishes that Trazyn has been repairing the throne in his display case, which is one of the most provocative single-line claims the Lane has produced. The reason that claim works is that Trazyn could repair the throne. He could repair the throne because he remembers what it is. He remembers what it is because he saw its kind in the field 60 million years ago, and an archivist's training does not let go of a thing once he has cataloged it. His interest in the throne, the canon hints at this but does not resolve, is either recognition or acquisition. He sees it and wants to preserve it because he understands its provenance. He sees it and wants to acquire it because he understands its value. The audience's strong reading does not require a choice between those two. The archivist's instinct is both. The throne is unique. Trazyn knows what it is. Trazyn wants it where it belongs. Trazyn defines where it belongs by the standard of his own galleries. The script is not going to resolve the question. The character does not resolve it either. He waits. And remember when the Lane Anchor video described Trajan as having repaired the throne in his display case? Hold that against the canonical fact that the Adeptus Mechanicus, after 10,000 years and the personal investigation of the Fabricator General of Mars, cannot repair the throne. The Fabricator General died during the attempt. The Drukhari delegation could only delay the death by a few centuries. But Trajan, in his gallery on Solemnus, has it functioning. He is the only known entity in the current setting who has demonstrably repaired the engineering.
That fact is either explained by extraordinary Necron technological prowess in general, a position the canon does not actually support, because Necron engineering is its own thing and is not interchangeable with Old One's engineering, or it is explained by Trajan specifically remembering the build. The script keeps the flag. The script offers the second explanation as a hypothesis. The script lets the audience hold the two hypotheses against each other and decide for themselves. Yet the Imperium has not catalogued any of this. The Imperium has produced 10,000 years of theology that says the opposite. The Imperial cult teaches, per its central doctrine, that the Emperor of mankind crafted the golden throne with his own hands, in his own forge, from materials he blessed. 10 billion imperial pilgrims a year visit its outer chambers. The ecclesiarchy preaches that the throne is the physical proof of the emperor's divinity, the proof that he is the creator and not merely the inheritor, the proof that his authority is his own and not borrowed. Every cardinal preaches this. Every shrine repeats it. The imperial creed depends on it. And the question is, what would happen to that authority if the Imperium admitted otherwise? What would happen is that the imperial cult would lose its central article of faith. The emperor would become, in the doctrinal register, a salver rather than a creator. He would become a being who found a thing and used it well, rather than a being who made a thing from nothing. The distance between those two framings is the distance between a god and a steward. The ecclesiarchy cannot afford to lose that distance. The Inquisition cannot afford to let the distance be lost. The Adeptus Mechanicus, who would in principle have the data to know, also cannot afford to know. Consider this.
The Adeptus Mechanicus already maintains a doctrinal position that the Emperor is the Omnissiah, the physical manifestation of the machine god. If the throne, the most sacred mechanism in the galaxy, turns out to be a Krork war engine, then the Omnissiah is sitting on the inheritance of an enemy species the Mechanicus does not acknowledge ever existed at scale. The current codex, Orc's treatment of the Krork, is brief precisely because the institutional cost of the longer treatment would be intolerable. The Mechanicus tolerates the Krork as an ancestor of the Orcs. The Mechanicus does not tolerate the Krork as the original engineers of the throne. The acceptable framing is that the Krork are diminished Xenos who are now green-skinned barbarians. The unacceptable framing is that the Krork were the Old One's answer to the same engineering problem the Emperor inherited a solution to. This is why the monographs are sealed. This is why the archmagi who read them close them again.
This is why Yul'kaeth, illustrative as he is a plausible illustration. Any Cogitor-grade Archmagos in M37 who pulled the file on the throne's structural particulars and ran the comparative analysis against the recovered fragments from the Halo Stars would, on encountering the match, have only one rational professional choice: to close the file, to never speak of it, to live with the knowledge unshared. And the canon, by leaving the throne's origin labeled unknown, reflects exactly the institutional outcome you would expect from such a culture of selective silence. The Imperium does not know because the Imperium has decided not to know.
The official record states that the throne is a Dark Age of technology artifact of unclear provenance, modified by the Emperor into its current form. The records say otherwise about almost nothing else as consistently as they say this.
The records say unknown, and they keep saying unknown across 10 editions of Codex material and 40 years of Black Library novels. That kind of consistent silence in a setting whose authors love to fill in blanks is itself a piece of evidence. The blank has been left deliberately. The blank is the institutional cover-up reproducing itself at the meta level. The blank is the doctrine, and so the question. The Golden Throne is the most sacred object in the Imperium of mankind. 10 billion imperial pilgrims a year visit its outer chambers. Every cardinal preaches that the master of mankind crafted it himself, with his own hands, in his own forge, from materials he blessed. It is a holy story. It is also a story. The throne's anchor-spar was forged in a war that ended 60 million years before the first human being existed. The throne was built by hands that were not human. The Emperor of mankind did not make it. He found it. He restored it. He set it in a chamber on Holy Terra and let the imperial cult invent the rest. The old ones lost the war in heaven. Their greatest war engine survived them. The Emperor of mankind sits upon it now, decaying, anchored to the warp by a machine no human civilization ever knew how to build. The relic is older than the relic keepers know.